All right. I'm going to continue on now with some more investigation. And if you can stick with this, I actually, I've been talking to my AI and setting up the Charlie Kirk scenario as if it were an accident by one of these high tech next generation laser weapons. And so the computer's been dealing with this, and I set up the whole scenario. Charlie, or my character, like I told him I was writing a book, was sitting on a platform on a chair and gave him the measurements. And so he's dealing with this as if it's an accident. But pretty soon I'm going to ask him. I'm asking initially some questions about the injury and the T-shirt action that we saw, how the T-shirt moved up. We all saw how the T-shirt moved up. We all saw some kind of poof, smoke, steam, or something come out around his neck opening of his T-shirt, which a lot of people thought was the microphone, and it could be related to the microphone. Not saying it's not. But what's fascinating is that this computer lays it all out. And then at the end, I'm asking it about what if this weren't an accident, but what if it were a crime scene? And how would that change things? And then I ask about the cover up, which he basically says it is. If the cover up removed the grass, the sod, the dirt, and then what would happen? So buckle up. This is absolutely crazy. Let me get over to my screen here so we can go through this, and I'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. I won't read his novel ideas because I'm not going to use them. But anyway, he's so helpful. I said to this computer, "Hello again. And we've been discussing an accidental strike by a ultra short pulse laser weapon like the Plaid. Would there be some noticeable movement in the character's T-shirt prior to or at the time of the beam strikes?" The computer answers by saying, in your story, including movement in the fabric adds a layer of invisible tension that grounds the science. Because the applied energetics Plaid is creating a high voltage environment and a plasma filament, the character's T-shirt would react to both the electrostatics and the air displacement. Whoa. Well, here's how the T-shirt would move, the computer tells us. The static lift prior to the strike, this is now seconds before the beam fires. The stage 2 charging of the capacitors and the ionization of the air in front of the shoebox lens creates a massive static field. The fibers of the cotton T-shirt would begin to stand away from his body. If the shirt is a loose fit, the hem and or the sleeves might slightly float toward the shoebox on the floor, as if pulled by a weak vacuum. You could describe the fabric creeping or tugging at his skin, making him want to adjust his shirt right before the strike. The magnetic snap. Because you have a magnetic wireless microphone on his chest, the fabric is pinned between the magnet and the microphone body. At the microsecond of the pulse, the Lorentz force, the physical jolt that's caused by the EMP, would cause the magnet to vibrate or click violently. The T-shirt would jerk or dimple inward at the chest as the magnet reacts to the surge. It would look like an invisible finger poking him hard in the chest microphone, causing the fabric to ripple outward from that point. The vapor jet at the moment of impact. This is the most dramatic movement. When the USPL hits the neck, it vaporizes tissue instantly, creating a high-pressure blowback plume. The collar of the T-shirt would be blown downward away from the neck. The rapidly expanding steam and plasma from the wound act like a localized gust of wind. We saw so much weird activity unexplainable by the 30-06, and so there's more. The neckline of the shirt would snap tight, across the collarbones, and you might see the fabric flutter or vibrate for a fraction of a second as the supersonic gases escape the wound site. The arc singe post-strike, the movement, if a plasma filament jumped from the neck to the chest microphone, now this is only 8-9 inches. As we discussed, the fabric between the 2 points would shrivel or pucker. Again, I'm asking about the t-shirt here. This is crazy. The synthetic fibers in the t-shirt, like a polyester blend, which I don't believe this was, would melt and pull toward the charred path of the arc. Well, I don't think it had polyester in it, so we'll scooch right along and go right back down to my next question. At some point before or after the strike, might the body of the t-shirt move in an upward direction at the stomach toward the neck? That's what we saw. In your story, having the t-shirt move upward toward the stomach and the chest is a brilliant, scientifically grounded detail. This would occur due to electrostatic attraction and the chimney effect created by the plasma filament. And here's how and when that upward movement would happen. 1, the pre-strike crawl. And mind you, this is like milliseconds before this whole thing happens. So it's very, very quick. I'm not sure we can slow down our videos this slow, but it'd be great if we could. As the applied energetics plaid, this is now the pulse laser weapon, reaches its final arming stage, it creates a massive positive charge in the air between the floor and the character. The character's body, grounded by the RXL microphone in his left hand, becomes negatively charged by comparison. This creates a powerful electrostatic attraction, the movement. Loose fabric at the stomach and the waist of the t-shirt would begin to creep upward, lifting away from his lap and ghosting toward his chest. It would look as if an invisible hand were lightly bunching the fabric toward the center of his torso. I think that's what we saw at the center of his t-shirt. You let me know what you guys think. The vacuum snap. When the USPL fires, it creates a plasma filament, a literal vacuum channel of superheated air. As the air in the beam path is vaporized, it creates a momentary low pressure zone, a partial vacuum. This acts like a suction force along the line of the beam. The stomach of the t-shirt would snap forward and upward toward the neck as the surrounding air rushes into the vacuum. It's a sharp, violent flutter that happens at the exact same microsecond as the plasma crack. The chimney effect, or the post-strike rise, immediately after the strike, the wound site in the neck is venting superheated steam and plasma, the vapor plume. Hot gas rises rapidly. This creates a localized updraft or chimney effect right against the character's chest. This rising column of heat would catch the neckline and the upper stomach of the shirt, tugging the fabric upward as if the character were standing over a subway grate, like Marilyn Monroe, her dress. The magnetic tuck. Since you have a magnetic wireless mic on the chest, the upward movement of the fabric would be pinned at that point. The shirt would bunch up and tent between the stomach and the chest microphone. It would look like the shirt is trying to fly off his body, but is being held back by the magnet. Again, we don't need his narrative how I would write this, but he does ask, would you like to know if the plasma filament would leave a visible track or scorch line on the t-shirt? I said, yes, I would, but we don't need to go into that because we will never see that t-shirt. So I'm kind of slowly scrolling past that. You can get involved with your AI too if you want to read about that in depth. Again, we won't ever see his t-shirt, so it won't matter. I said this to him now, and I'm taking this guy right to the amphitheater, the tent, the temperature, exactly everything as this goes on. I visualize, I say to the computer, the character wearing a white t-shirt. Could there also be some type of burn marks on his right side under the wireless microphone? If so, what could those appear to look like? And now we saw this in the Charles McClintock Wilson photos as they were moving Charlie to the SUV. He goes on to answer this. In your story, having the character wear a white t-shirt makes the forensic details much more striking. Because the wireless microphone is magnetically attached to his right chest, the accidental strike from the applied energetics plaid would create very specific marks underneath the device due to induction heating and secondary arcing. Here's what the burn marks on his right side beneath the microphone would look like. Now, we can't see the whole thing, but it's interesting to think about this while we look at those photos. The branding iron mark, thermal. As we discussed, the magnetic clip and the metal chassis of the microphone will flash heat due to the EMP. On the white t-shirt, you would see a perfectly defined brown or toasted rectangular outline matching the shape of the microphone's base. Again, it's underneath the fabric, and the magnet is on the top, so it's upside down according to how it's supposed to be, and again, how my computer thinks it's being worn, apparently. So keeping that in mind, the skin beneath the shirt, his skin would have a contact burn. Because it happened so fast, it would be a waxy white patch surrounded by an angry red ring. And if you look at that high definition picture, you see it looks like two strips of red, darker red, brownish red possible burn. That's what you see. So we don't see the whole thing. It would literally look like he had been branded with the shape of the microphone. The spider web or the Lechtenberg tracking, because the plasma filament jumped or curved from his neck to the microphone, electricity would leak through the fabric of the t-shirt to reach his skin. Later on, we talk about moisture on his skin from it being 90 plus degrees outside. You would see tiny jagged black or charcoal gray root patterns spreading out from the center of the microphone site. In forensics, these are similar to Lichtenberg figures, which appear on lightning strike victims. If you have never seen that, you should Google Lichtenberg figure so you can get a visual. On a white shirt, these fractal burns would be incredibly vivid, looking like shattered veins of carbon etched onto the cotton. The wireless microphone contains a small lithium battery and copper wiring. The surge would likely cause them to vent or melt. You would see small circular pinholes in the t-shirt where the superheated copper droplets or battery acid spat out of the microphone's casing. These holes would be ringed with bright green or blue tinted residue from the vaporized cotton in the microphone circuitry, which would stand out sharply against the white fabric. The pressure bruise. Because of the Lorentz force caused by the magnet to kick against his chest, even if the heat didn't break the skin, there would be a deep rectangular bruise or contusion directly under the microphone. The force would be so localized that the dent from the microphone might still be visible on his skin for several minutes after the fall, even as the white t-shirt begins to soak up blood from the neck wound above. Okay, I'm going to do one more question here, and then we're going to get into some really crazy stuff. I forgot. Did you mention that both hands would be burned from the escaping electrical force? I asked. On our previous discussion, we focused primarily on the left hand because it was grounded by the RXL microphone. But in a high voltage USPL ultra short pulsed laser accident, both hands would indeed suffer distinct types of injuries because your character. Okay, now let me get to the answer. He says, in our previous discussion, we focused primarily on the left hand because it was grounded by the RXL microphone. But in a high voltage USPL ultra short pulsed laser accident, both hands would indeed suffer distinct types of injuries. Because your character is part of a circuit formed by the laser's plasma filament, the electrical surge behaves differently in each limb. The left hand, it's the grounding burn. Since this hand is holding the metal RXL microphone, it acts like a primary exit point for the electricity induced by the neck strike. A pitted electrical burn will form. Small white centered craters on the palm and the fingertips where the current jumped from the skin to the metal casing of the microphone. If you look at those high definition photos of Charlie's hand when he drops the microphone, that is indeed exactly what you see. And I've been wondering what could have caused that for quite some time. The electricity would cause the muscle to lock, meaning that he would be clamped to the microphone even as he fell, potentially tearing the skin of the palm of his hand as the weight of his body pulled against the locked grip. The right hand, the arcing burn. The right hand's injury is more accidental. As the character sits in the chair, his right hand is likely near his lap or chest. A flash arc burn. When the beam strikes the neck and the wireless chest microphone on his right side explodes with EMP energy, electricity looks for the nearest path to jump. If his right hand is within a few inches of that wireless microphone or his own torso, a secondary arc, a tiny lightning bolt, will jump to his fingers. The appearance, singed or feathered burn marks on the knuckles or the fingertips. Unlike the deep pit marks on the left hand, these would look like jagged red tracking lines or Lichtenberg figures. Again, if you don't know what Lichtenberg is, you should look that up so you get a good visual. Or singed hair on the back of the hand. The global symptom, compartment syndrome risk. Because electricity travels from the neck down both arms and into the microphones. The doctor in your story would check for internal cooking of the forearm muscles. High voltage surges cause muscles to swell instantly inside their sheath or fascia. His hands might look relatively okay on the surface, but within minutes of the fall, his forearms would become rock hard and cold to the touch as the internal swelling cuts off the blood flow. Scrolling now past his narrative as he helps me write my novel here. Let's see, because I'm going to ask him, what if it isn't an accident? And what if it's a crime scene? So stick with me here. This is kind of crazy. If it doesn't come out on this video, it'll be on the next one because I know these get kind of long, but it's important information, I think, that you really understand what the computer's telling us. It's not me. Let's see. I'm going to pass this one. He asked me if I would like to know how the investigator would calculate the distance and the voltage. And that's just way too beyond our concern at this point. I'm just kind of curious here what would happen. I also asked about would much of the pulsed beam be visible to the human eye or to the latest iPhone camera? And he goes on to answer, and this is kind of interesting. In your story, the visibility of the applied energetics plaid weapon strike would be a major point of confusion for witnesses. Because the USPL weapons operate in a near infrared spectrum, the beam in itself is technically invisible to the human eye, but the side effects are blindingly obvious. Here is how it would look to a human witness versus a modern iPhone 17 Pro or similar 2026 era smartphones. A witness wouldn't see a bolt of light traveling from the floor to the neck. Instead, they would see a human eye sees the ionization of the air, not the laser itself. It would look like a faint shivering violet or electric blue thread that appears and disappears in a heartbeat, probably faster than a heartbeat in actuality. At the moment of impact on the neck, there would be stroboscopic white flash. A stroboscopic white flash, like a high-end camera flash going off in a dark room. This is the plasma bloom, created when the laser vaporizes the character's skin. Anyone looking directly at the strike zone would have a purple or green blind spot burned into their vision for several minutes afterwards. Now, let me just remind you, because I remember Baron Coleman said this. People have noticed that everyone looked away from Charlie. The audio visual people, they looked down. Everybody looked away. Or maybe they had special sunglasses too, but they didn't look at him. They all looked away. People have noticed that. Not me, but I listen to what people say. The latest iPhone, the infrared overload, this goes on to talk about how it might show up. So I'm going to kind of skip through this. It's a lot of technical stuff. But it says here, because the USPL pulses so fast, quadrillionths of a second, an iPhone recording at 60 or 120 frames per second might only capture the beam in a single frame. It might look like a frozen, jagged bolt of purple lightning that appears to be bent or shredded due to the way the digital sensors scan from top to bottom. The frame containing the strike would likely be completely blown out or pure white in the center, with digital artifacts or colored lines or static streaking across the image because the EMP surge from the plasma filament interfered with the phone's internal hardware. And it goes on to talk about the difference between the video and and basically we're not going to see much. If you do, it's going to be like maybe a purple thread or a little segment of purple comb because this thing moves so darn fast. Even the fastest, newest iPhone is probably not going to pick up much. So let me just see I asked it about the iPhone using the video or the still camera, the difference. And basically I just said what that's going to be. So I'm going to kind of scroll around. I know you guys, everybody's busy. But I think this is important, so you guys might want to check with your AI and ask similar questions. So I said, this is what I started now to lay out the exact Charlie Kirk program here. I said this to my computer who's helping me write a novel. He thinks, I am visualizing the incident took place around high noon outside. Anything else you can add? And he does talk about writing a high noon outdoor scene at a place like Fort Huachuca adds a layer of harsh realism to your story. Mind you, if you listen to the last 2-hour video, it goes in depth into these weapons, and they are from Fort Huachuca. And that's why I think it's likely that something like this may have been used. Even they did field testing on this. So the computer thinks so. I have to agree with him. So it talks about the setting in comparison to Fort Huachuca. So I was gonna scroll through that, how the heat affects and all of that jazz. And I just want to tell you what I did. And if you want to read through all this, you can pause the video because it's all here. What happens in an open space. And he talks about the white t-shirt at high noon and the reflective blah, blah, blah. And so let me just see my next question. I asked this. You spoke of a possible sound of a gunshot coming at the time of impact. Would that sound be heard mostly by people nearby, but not people 50 feet away or more? And in short, let me just tell you what he says, because I change this story and I bring it into the actual amphitheater setup. So he talks about the decibels that would be heard at a distance and up close up. Because the reason I'm asking this and kind of looking, I'm going to let you guys read through this while I explain this, is that people, depending upon where they were at, where they were seated. Now, keep in mind the crowd noise is quite loud because you got people that love Charlie and hate Charlie, and so they're all kind of screaming and chanting and booing and all kinds of stuff. But there are people that didn't hear anything. Some people thought it sounded like a pop, an M80 or some kind of fireworks kind of thing. A lot of people said it didn't sound like a rifle, and it depending upon where you were standing. So that's kind of why I was asking, probing my AI about these, what it might sound like if you were here and there. And now I'm going to get a little bit deeper into this. Just so you know, I just want you to be able to see all the work that I put in, all the questions I asked, and how I kind of take my AI assistant through this. Now I say to him this: I'm visualizing the setting as an amphitheater type bowl like environment. High noon, about 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, anything you might want to add. And in fact, he does add about this. And it's quite interesting. Like the acoustics and all of that, how he looks at it now. He's looking at it as like a cement amphitheater. So I'm going to kind of just scroll through this again. I'm not going to read all this to you because I want to get to the crime part, because that's where it really kicks in. Okay, so there you go. If you just scrolling through, you might have to pause this, but it talks about all the effects of the weather and the air and just everything, the t-shirt and all that stuff, because he's looking at this from like basically a cement amphitheater. Okay. So then I'm going to ask another question here. I ask this: would a large water feature in the amphitheater, which is mostly grass, and the water feature cement, have any effects? Now we're getting down to the scene. A large water feature near the platform in a grass and cement amphitheater adds 3 critical hard science elements to your scene: conductivity, refraction, and acoustic amplification. At 90 degrees Fahrenheit, a water feature like a fountain or a reflecting pool. Now, a lot of people were sitting in front of that, so we kind of don't have that reflection, I think, that the computer's thinking about. Creates a localized microclimate. Now, here it does, because it adds some humidity that directly interacts with the ultra short pulsed laser strike. The grounding danger: water and cement are significantly more conductive than grass. The path of least resistance: since your character is holding a grounded RXL microphone and the water feature is likely nearby, the electrical loop of the accident becomes more intense. Don't know how that fits in here, but it's something to think about. The water feature increases the local humidity at the center of the bowl. Moist air is easier to ionize into plasma. Now we're talking. This makes the plasma filament of the plaid weapon more stable and potentially more curved toward the character's metal gear. This is the most likely cause of a high-tech mishap in a fictional story. Let's see. If the water is still, it acts like a mirror. Well, that wasn't the case because we had people sitting all around it. In your narrative, the investigator might find that the laser didn't fire directly at the character. Instead, it fired at a calibration target, hit the water's feature. Again, there were people sitting around, so that wouldn't work, and glinted toward the character's neck. Well, that's not how it happened. Because it's high noon, the sunlight hitting the water, and again, people were sitting around the water, so I don't think we got much of this. And the sounds travel differently over water and hard cement compared to grass. Grass absorbs the sound muffling, cement and water reflect it. If the character is sitting between the weapon and a cement water feature, the gunshot crack would be deafening. Okay. The sound would hit the water, bounce off the cement basin, and slap back toward the witnesses. Don't know how much of this pertains because it's a very unique water feature. The shock wave from the 10 kilowatt pulse is so strong that witnesses might see a shiver or ripple on the surface of the water. Again, it's kind of like mini waterfalls in a sense. Don't know if that anybody could see anything like that because of all the other bodies in the way. Or even a tiny geyser of mist. Ozone absorption. Water vapor is excellent at trapping the smell of ozone. After the character falls, the mist from the water feature would mingle with the vapor plume from the wound. Under 90-degree sun, I think it was 92 that day, this would create a localized humid fog around the platform that smells like a wet electrical fire. Interesting. Okay. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If this were a crime rather than an accident, and the platform was under a tent placed on grass, would the criminals, let me open this up, need to cover the grass with cement or pavers to cover up traces of something that could have been in the grass? And here's the answer. There's a couple pretty telling answers here if this were a crime, because I just changed up the story a little bit. In a high-tech crime involving the USPL weapon like the Plaid, the grass is actually a witness that criminals would be desperate to hide. However, covering it up with cement or pavers would be a massive red flag to a forensic investigator from Fort Huachuca. Here is why criminals would want to cover the grass and why cement is their fix. 1. The plasma track, the burnt path. When a USPL fires, the plasma filament, the violet thread, is so hot it flash chars everything in its immediate vicinity. Even if the beam is 16 inches above the ground, the intense UV radiation and convection heat would leave a dead yellowed shadow or a scorched line in the grass directly beneath the beam's path. The cover-up. Criminals would use pavers to hide this perfectly straight line that points directly to where the weapon was hidden. The microsoot, soot. A laser strike on a human neck creates a vapor plume of biological matter. This biomist settles as a fine microscopic layer of carbonized DNA and soot on the blades of grass, the cover-up. You can't wash grass to remove forensic biological soot. The only way to hide it is to bury it under a hard surface like cement or pavers. When the beam hits the human neck, it causes photomechanical splation. We talked about that in the last video. Tiny microscopic fragments of charred skin and bone are blasted outward. The trace. These fragments are like forensic glitter. They get trapped in the soil and the grass roots. The cover-up. If an investigator uses a vacuum or sticky tape on the grass, they will find these jagged fragments. Pavers prevent the investigator from reaching the soil. As a professional military testing site, at a professional military testing site or an amphitheater, sudden landscaping changes are highly suspicious. That's what the computer says. I have to agree. The investigator's logic: if a mishap occurred under a tent and the investigator sees a fresh patch of pavers that wasn't in the original blueprints, they will immediately suspect a cover-up. The ground penetrating radar. Modern military investigators would simply use ground penetrating radar to, quote, see through the pavers. They would see the disturbed soil and the compressed dead grass underneath, which would preserve the scorched marks in an oxygen-deprived time capsule. The EMP from the Plaid strike can actually ionize the minerals in the soil, changing their magnetic signature. Criminals might think cement blocks this, but a sensitive magnetometer can still detect the magnetic scar in the earth through several inches of stone. Okay, I'm asking another question here. Stick with me. So even if construction workers, I asked, removed the sod and grass, you're saying that if a person were to test the dirt, there would be evidence of an EMP or magnetic trace. If the answer is yes, how long would that evidence last under the cement or the pavers? The short answer, the computer says, is yes. Even if the sod is stripped away, which I believe it was, a weapon as powerful as the Applied Energetics Plaid leaves a geophysical scar in the soil that a forensic team from Fort Huachuca could detect. However, the evidence, quote, quote, isn't a glowing light. It's a change in the physical properties of the dirt. Here's how it works and how long it lasts. The magnetic alignment. Soil contains microscopic particles of iron and minerals like magnetite. Normally, these are oriented randomly. When a 100,000 volt EMP from the plasma filament hits, it creates a massive instantaneous magnetic field. This field is strong enough to physically realign those ion particles in the dirt to point toward the beam's path, a phenomenon called lightning-induced remnant magnetism, or LIRM. Under a layer of cement or pavers which protects the soil from rain and foot traffic, this magnetic alignment can last for years. It's effectively frozen in time until the soil is physically churned or plowed. If the plaid beam glanced off the ground, or if a secondary arc jumped from the character's RXL microphone to the dirt, the heat of the USPL plasma filament is hotter than the surface of the sun. It can flash melt silica, sand, in the soil into microscopic glass tubes or beads called fulgurites. Even if the construction workers removed the grass, these tiny glass beads will stay in the dirt. They are chemically inert and they are permanent. An investigator would sift the dirt under the pavers, finding fresh glass beads with a specific chemical signature, vaporized copper from the microphone or lithium from the battery, is the smoking gun. The plasma filament rips nitrogen molecules out of the air and shoves them into the ground. This creates a localized spike in nitrates and nitrites in the topsoil along the beam's path. Under cement, these chemicals are shielded from leaching, being washed away by rain. They could remain detectable for 6 to 12 months. When the electricity exited the character's hand and hit the metal RXL microphone, it vaporized a tiny amount of the microphone's casing, likely a zinc or aluminum alloy. These heavy metal vapors settle into the dirt. If the investigator finds a higher than normal concentration of zinc 72 or specific alloys in the straight line under the pavers, they can prove that a specific type of microphone was present at the moment of a high energy event. So that's kind of that's kind of enough to digest, I would say. There you go. That gives you something to think about, and that gives us more answers. Again, this is not my work. I wish it was. I wish I was this bright, but this is what the computer says. And I set the stage in the previous video that the stage was set that this was in fact Charlie Kirk and it was an accident. And then I started to ask him about what kind of weapons, and this weapon that he's talking about, referring to it. We kind of go in depth in that 2-hour video. So if you want to know about it, it's all right there. All of the answer stuff I have with AI is all there. Gives you something to think about for sure. Because if this is what they use, then it answers the main question I've had all along. Why did the government freak out so bad when people started looking and questioning Fort Huachuca, when Mitch came forward, and around that time, Barron came out with the electrocution? And again, let me just say this. This is not my work. I don't care what you think about it. I'm just sharing it with you to give you something to think about. I already did my research into 9/11. I already got beat up by the internet. I don't care about it anymore. I'm just searching for the truth. All right. While taking a break, charging my GoPro camera, I remembered to ask one more question. So I'm going to put it in here at the end and get through it as quickly as possible, because I know it's not easy to listen to a long video. But I wanted to know, what would be the effects? Here we go. What would be the effects if my character that I'm talking to the computer about was wearing a long, approximately 32-inch chain, silver, I say, necklace with a cross and a St. Christopher type medal? That's the question. And this is the answer. I don't know if this is true about Charlie, but let's say this is the answer I'm getting from the computer. So again, this is like the t-shirt. We will never know, but this is what it says. A long silver necklace would turn into a branding iron, causing severe pattern burns and potentially melting into the character's skin at the moment of the strike. The branding iron, the silver chain and metal, would act as a highly conductive path for the massive electrical current induced by the plaid strike and its associated EMP. The injury, the metal would flash heat instantly to several hundred degrees. It would cause a full thickness burn, or a 3rd-degree burn, that perfectly matches the pattern of the chain and metals against the skin. The skin underneath would be dry, leathery, and potentially white or charred black, but surprisingly not always painful immediately due to nerve damage. The cross and St. Christopher medal would leave distinct brutal contact burns on the chest. The 90-degree Fahrenheit ambient heat in the amphitheater would intensify this effect. The hot metal would literally sear his skin. Again, we don't know about this, but we do know there's burns. And in extreme cases, the silver could even fuse or weld into the wound, requiring surgical removal later. I don't think we saw that. Silver, and I'm just assuming this is silver, has a relatively low melting point. The immense heat and current could cause the chain itself to fail. Well, we did see that. It broke. The tiny links of the chain would be deformed or fused together in some spots. A link might vaporize entirely, leaving a gap in the chain and an accompanying concentrated white-hot burn mark on the skin below it. An investigator would note that the silver had a mottled or pitted texture, proving it had reached its melting point of over 1700 degrees Fahrenheit in specific areas where the current was most intense. The long 32-inch chain provides an easy path for electricity to jump to other conductive items. The electricity might arc from the bottom of the St. Christopher medal to the character's metal belt, buckle, or even his right hand if it were nearby. This would cause secondary feathering or tracking burns, the Lichtenberg figures, spreading out from the metal site toward other metal objects or his skin. Well, there's an answer for you. Again, this is not my work. I'm just asking the computer to give me some answers, and I thought it was very interesting. We're talking about a brand new top-of-the-line weapon that is at Fort Huachuca, which makes it very interesting that Fort Huachuca triggered so many government people. So many government people. So I just thought this was really interesting. And I will, you guys let me know what you think. And I encourage you to take all the information that we do know. And now keep in mind, we don't have any information from the autopsy. It was performed quickly by a doctor who also probably would be trained in direct energy trauma, as we learned in the longer video that I posted up yesterday. So happy hunting. I hope we can all put it together, because I think we're on the right track. I think the government's hiding something. I think the government's involved. It's just, again, like I said, it's like the nanothermite. If you're using a weapon, and that's why we can't quite figure out why it's not a 30-06 like they say, why maybe it's an exploding microphone, but how do you explain all the other burns in his hands and arms and everything else? So maybe, just maybe, this is an answer. So we'll be back with more, because I've got more questions from my AI.